All right. Welcome everybody to this month's or July's IFTN Educational Hour webinar. Um, I'm Joy Kirkpatrick, and I'm an IFTN past board member, just recently past board member, but I'm still helping out with some of the educational hours. You'll see me in September as well. And my role is here in Wisconsin as the Farm Succession Outreach Specialist for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. So just a few housekeeping items before I introduce Erik. If you are a certified farm succession coordinator and you would like to receive CEU credits for this webinar, you need to remain on for the entire presentation. A survey link will be shared in the chat box around about 15 minutes or so before the end. When I say you need to remain for the entire presentation, technically that's not the entire presentation, but we're going to let people be able to start recording their credits around 10:45. Just complete the survey, and you can only get those credits if you participate in the live webinar. It will be recorded and shared on our IFTN website for later viewing, just for professional development purposes. Please remain muted during the presentation, but you can put questions into chat and we will try to monitor those as much as we can. And Erik can either answer them during the presentation or at the end. At the end, we're happy to open it up so that if you want to unmute and have some conversation after that, but during the presentation, please remain muted. Thank you for being here. Your participation and interest in farm transition are what keeps this nonprofit organization going. We are excited to have Erik Veldhuizen, an associate professor at the Dutch Center of Expertise in Family Business at Windesheim University of Applied Sciences. And I'm going to say this one might be wrong, but in Zwolle, in the Netherlands. The title of his presentation is Fairness in Farm Succession, No Hard Feelings, which is based on his research that was published in the Journal of Family Business Management in 2019, and that's where I found it. And we know that inheritance distribution is one of the common tensions that we see in the US. So I'm really excited to have Erik here to talk about his research. And I will let Erik take over now and do additional introductions or additional information background about yourself. So you are ready to
Thank
go.
you. Thank you very much, Joy. Very nice introduction. And the name of the city is almost correct. It's Zwolle.
Well, okay.
But my last name was very good pronounced.
Okay.
My name is Erik Velhuizen. I'm a business economist, and I started 10 years ago at Windesheim, University of Applied Sciences, in our Dutch Center of Expertise in Family Business. And at the moment, the last 10 years, we've been doing projects on the more socio-emotional part of family businesses, mainly on succession. And this is also what this presentation is about. Actually, this presentation and this paper is built on the first project I had to work on like 10 years ago. So I'm a associate professor. So this was my first project, and also from personally motivated. I am living in a rural area in the Netherlands, actually in the central part, where we have a lot of farmers around and a lot of farmers that were in the same age category in the middle of succession. And then they were having all kind of troubles dealing with their parents, for example, that still had some money and interest in the company, but also with the brothers and sisters that didn't want to actually get rid of their inheritance, so to say, and they had to sign for it, and they had some troubles with that. And I found that that was also like hampering the business, actually. For example, that they were not allowed to make the investments that they wanted to do. And as an economist, I was very interested that that was something that we never found during my studies, at least not in Rotterdam University, Erasmus University. But I found also at a lot of other universities in the economic sciences, there's not much attention to family businesses. So that's that was raising my interest, and at the same time there was this nice job vacancy at Windesheim that was especially on this topic. So I was lucky. And yeah, I will now share my slides with you. Maybe a little bit more about the university we are in and also the team. So we're doing a lot of practice-oriented research. So that's a little bit different than the basic university. So it's a University of Applied Science, which means that actually the projects that we do, they always start with yeah, like a question from practice, and we should also deliver all kind of practical results. And we can think of like all kind of tools, like card sets for businesses, or kind of working books, practical books, role plays, all that kind of things, and that are very practical, easy to use, and yeah, and we work with a lot of small, medium-sized enterprises, so that means that the tool should be very accessible and easy to use. And now I'm trying to share the PowerPoint. Then I hope. I'm not sure if you can see it now. No. Let's see. Ah, there we go. This should work. Yeah, this should work, right, Joy?
Yep, we are seeing it now. Thanks.
Nice, nice. So it starts with a nice picture of chocolate, and you will think maybe why chocolate? Why is that relevant for farm succession? And well, I will tell you later on. But of course, this is chocolate from the Netherlands, and it's yeah, one of the best chocolates we have. And if it's thinking about farm transition and farm succession, it's also about like sharing things. And if you ask for chocolate, then everybody likes chocolate. So it's like a comparison to farm succession. I will show you a bit later, because this is a special type of chocolate that makes sharing even more difficult than just sharing the bars. Now I hope I can also move to the next. Yeah, there we go. So as I told you, like this project and the paper that we wrote was built on a nice project, which was called Succession Agriculture Family-Wide Endeavor. And in this project, yeah, we investigated 14 farm families in the Netherlands that were all in different stages of succession. And actually, I will talk through you in a few minutes. They had all kind of issues in the past. Mostly in the past succession, they experienced all kind of difficulties with family, and their desire was to have a succession process that was not only good from the business side, but also from the family side. So that was actually the motivation for the research. So how can we manage the succession process that has a positive outcome for both the business, but also the family relation? And as we found actually throughout this project, and the focus actually was on helping them with an instrument of governance, which is a family constitution. As we found out through the project, is that it's yeah, mainly in the past we see these succession process were mainly oriented around the successor and the incumbent leader. And we find that yeah, actually involving also all the other involved parties is very important, especially for writing a family constitution, of course. And then yeah, the family decides themselves which parties are involved. But yeah, we found that mainly the non-successors, they have an important role. And that actually became the focus of this project, because we found that in the literature there's not much, yeah, there's no yeah, not much attention on this role of the non-successors. And we found actually that this can be a very important factor in successful succession. So that's what yeah, we aimed for in this project. Yeah, we do this practice-oriented projects with other parties as well. So we also involved another University of Applied Sciences, which is made mainly an agricultural University of Applied Sciences. It's called ERES, University of Applied Sciences, but also two agricultural partners. One was the Dutch Agriculture Youth Association, NAEK in Dutch, and then we have the LTO, which is actually the yeah, the branch organization for farmers in the Netherlands. They do also a lot of lobbying, political lobbying, but also a lot of farmers are a member of this organization. So that means that they also have an interest that yeah, the results of this project are also interesting for their target group. Now, this is the actual result of the paper that I'm going to use for this presentation as well. So we were very happy that this research project also resulted in a nice yeah, scientific article. which, as you just mentioned, Joy, was published in 2019 in the journal Family Business Management. And it's indeed, the title is about no hard feelings, because we found that, in the past, and that's also one of the reasons that many of these farms wanted to participate in our project. Yeah, they experienced some kind of hard feelings by mostly non-successors. So our interest is in how, what kind of justice principles are used, and why can these hard feelings exist? Why do they happen, and how can you manage them actually, so that in the afterwards you can look back at a nice succession process from all parties that are involved. So a little bit about the Dutch farm context. Well, these are the typical Dutch pictures of farms. You probably know the Dutch the tulip bulbs. We are very famous about exporting them worldwide. And we see the cows, of course. This is not the picture that we see in all farms, but this is actually in our area. A lot of farms, they do have these tulps, and they do have these dairy farms. And then mainly they are small and medium sized, actually. So like looking at the average size of the Dutch farms in dairy farming, it's about 120 cows. So those are not like the very big farms that we're talking about, but it's like 90% of the population are these kind of farms. We look a little bit further. With these small farms, we still have an enormous amount of export. Actually, beside the US, we are on the third place worldwide. So that means that the Dutch farmers are doing a lot of good things, actually. And we have a lot of different types of farming, especially in our area. We have a lot of dairy farms, I just told you, but also, what we call the um, arable farming, also grazing livestock, but also livestock without grazing. And there's a small portion of market gardening, what we call, but it is really a small portion. I think mainly it's arable farming, and in the western part we have also greenhouses. But as our university is located in the eastern part of the Netherlands, you can look at the map. We can see in this eastern part there's mainly the grazing livestock and arable farming. So that's also the farms that have been part in our research project. Let's move to the next slide. There we go. So a situation in the Netherlands is that we see that the number of farms is declining a lot. So if we look in the year 2000, we almost had 100,000 farms, and it almost halved in 25 years. We see that there's a relatively low ROI, return on investment. Average annual income of Dutch farmers is about 82,000 euros, which is a household income. And that also means that you see that a lot of farms, it's typically a household. It's man and a wife, often, that they combine the work, and that's also how they earn their money. And it also means that it's maybe more difficult to transfer the business to more of the children. So often we see that only one of the children can inherit the farm, also because of this, that the farm income is relatively low. We also see that a lot of Dutch farmers are quite old. Almost 25% are already aged 65 years or older, which also means that the succession is a very urgent problem for most of these farms, if they can find a successor. Because it's really not the standard, as we see that education, of course, increased. So a lot of young potential successors also may have other career options. So it's also with the current development, if we look at also the new laws with regard to all the how do you call it? The Dutch word is stikstof. So that means that there is a lot of it's difficult to develop your farm to make it larger. So that makes other career options maybe more interesting. What is also typical for the Dutch agricultural industry is that we have a reduced tax regime for agricultural succession. So many small and medium-sized enterprises, actually all small and medium-sized enterprises, family businesses, they have this reduced tax regime, which means that if you pass over your business to the next generation, you can have a tax reduction of I would say the first 1.5 million euros of value that is even not being taxed. And over that, there's also a very large tax reduction, so that makes it more interesting to transfer the business. But that also means that a large part of the farm will be gifted. Because of this tax reduction, you can see that it makes it possible to gift an enormous part of the value of the farm to the children, or at least one of the children. And that also implies that the other children, they miss part of their inheritance. Yeah, I think this is typical. This is not really typical Dutch. I think this is worldwide. We see a combination, of course, of the business and the family residencies, which means that the non-successors, they are also raised at the farm and they become emotionally attached. So there's a strong emotional attachment to the farm and often also strong family ties. This one is maybe typical for the businesses here, that we see that the going concern value of the farms that is often much lower than the market value. This is really caused by the high value of the land. We often see average values of around 5 to 7 million euros. And if we look for the transfer value or the going concern value, that is sometimes less than 10% of that value to make it possible to transfer the farm to the next gen. We also see that for the majority of the farms, that continuity can only be ensured by this unequal distribution. And that makes the granting factor, as we call it, very important. So we have that the granting factor means that the non-succeeding siblings, they grant the farm to the successor and they renounce their claim on any future inheritance. So they also have to sign for that. And that, that is important. And that means that also if we're looking at the succession process, that needs attention. So how can we make this granting factor be present, and instead of that there are going to be all kind of fights? To give some examples of the farms that participated in the project and the problems they experienced in the past. We had one farm family, for example, they had a legal fight with their family members that lasted 5 years. That costed, of course, a lot of money. And the reason was that their farmland actually was bought by a municipality because they wanted to build houses. So they sold their farm, but they started a new farm on another place. And of course, this farm, I mean, with the money that they earned, was much bigger, and a nicer house and a nice car. And all family members, they started to complain. And they started this lawsuit. But fortunately, if we look at the Dutch law, we really protect the continuity of firms and farms as well. So if you look at the firm as being continued on a different location, this means that the family members, they didn't have, they were not in their right, so to say. So actually the business could continue, but the family relations got really harmed. And that was then one reason for a farm to participate in our project. I think this model, the three-circle model of family business, is very well known also to the participants in this webinar. Of course, the model by Tajuri and Davis, which is really helpful if we show this to businesses and we ask them to first locate their own position. Where are you located? And we ask this question to all family members. If they are in the family circle, or are they working in the business, or are they already owners? That makes things already very clear. That also makes, if we ask them, where are you now and where will you be in the next 5 years? That gives some very interesting discussions. And also thinking about, of course, the ownership. Who will be the future owner? And then the main question behind this project is indeed, how can we manage the business continuity and the family harmony at the same time? That we see that it's often a balancing act. So how can you make this successful? Then looking for this particular study, our objective was to increase our knowledge, how fairness is perceived by non-successors, because they didn't have much attention in the literature on family businesses yet. And also what happens if there is some perceived injustice, and how does that impact the family business system? As a theoretical objective, we think that it is interesting to apply the framework of distributive and procedural justice, and especially to this unique context of family farm succession. And as a practical objective, of course, we would like to increase the acceptance of succession outcomes by all family members. So therefore, we would like to learn how non-successors perceive the family farm succession. And that's also the research question now. How do they perceive justice if we look at succession specifically for family farms? We focused on two types of justice. And this is very important. One of the justice principles we have, it is called distributive justice, which is the perceived fairness of the outcome. And I will explain a little bit later what we mean with that. And then we also have, of course, procedural justice, and this is much more about the process. So this is not about the outcome, but more about how the procedures used to determine the outcome, how participants perceive the fairness of these procedures. So looking at the first type of justice, and I guess that this is also not very new to most of you, as it has been part of previous webinars. But if we look at the distributive justice, we mean the person's perception of who is entitled to what from whom in a particular situation. And then there are actually three elements. We can look at distributive justice based on equality. And that's often what happens in the family circle, that parents want to treat all their children equally. And that would mean that that the ownership would be shared between all the children, if we have this principle of equality. Well, we see that this is already something very difficult in family farm succession. So also the families, they have to reduce that equality principle. So other principles that can be used, looking at distributive justice, that based on needs. So there can be all kind of needs that, for example, the children have. It can be that one of the children wants a particular education because they really want to have some kind of job. For example, to be somewhere to work in a hospital, for example, to become a surgeon. That means that parents have to pay a very expensive education. So that can mean that the needs of the children can be very different. And that can also be accepted because we say, well, different children have different needs. So then based on the needs, then you can make a different decision. So that may be different than the decision based on equality. And then merit-based, it's really based on all the efforts that you put in something. And that's also what we see in farming, of course, that the children that work a lot at the farm, they may have more rights to be the successor. And we see the counterpart, that if all children work at the farm, then it can become more difficult to accept that only one of the children becomes the successor. And especially if these principles are not made clear, and that's also what we learned from this study, then it's really difficult because we see that the parents, they use these different principles, but the children, they're also looking at these principles from different perspectives. So I think one of the insights of our study is that it's really important to discuss and to be very explicit about these different principles, the principles that you are using, and also that guide your decisions. So looking at justice, it really means that if you adhere to certain rules of conduct or certain principles, and if we refer to the word fairness, they are often used interchangeably, but we use it more like it is a moral evaluation of this conduct. So we see justice and fairness as related but separate constructs. So what can be the effective justice if there is perceived justice? Well, that can have very positive effect, of course. If perceived justice is there, then there will be trust and commitment and maybe more helpful behavior and diminished conflict. But on the other hand, if there is perceived injustice, well, there can be very negative consequences, of course. Negative behaviors, including jealousy, even retaliation or opportunism, and sometimes which is called the Fredo effect. You probably know this. This picture will show you about the Fredo effect. This is really from the movie The Godfather. Fredo was the second son, right, in the family of the Don Corleone, and Fredo was really showing some deviant behavior. maybe because he perceived some injustice in the way he was raised. He was not being seen as the successor by his father, because even his younger brother performed much better. And then in the end, it really turned out bad. For those of you who've seen this movie, I think Michael even killed Fredo in the end. So that really went very wrong. Then we come back to the chocolate that I started with in the beginning. So this is the inside of the package, and there's a really nice story behind the chocolate. This is invented by a Dutch guy about 20 years ago. And actually, this guy was really wondered that he was eating chocolate, and no bar that he could buy was actually what he called slave-free and sustainable chocolate. So he found out that every piece of chocolate that you could buy in the Netherlands, either there were slaves or there was not a good distribution of wealth between the farmers and between the distributors and the producers of the chocolate. So what he came up was this idea of inventing chocolate or making chocolate that is really slave-free, 100% slave-free, and it is also giving a fair distribution also to the farmers themselves. So this is Tony's Chocolonely, it is called. And the nice thing about this chocolate that I explained in the beginning, that it's all unequal parts in the bar. So that means that if you have to share this bar with your children, it becomes really difficult. I mean, to get a fair share or an equal share, so to say. So this is what I'm also using in all kind of trainings here with other types of family businesses, showing that it may be very difficult to get an equal outcome of the succession process. And as I explained in the justice principles, it's even not possible to, each system in the family business, each subsystem has a different principle of fairness. So it's really hard to get an outcome that is accepted by everyone based on the outcome itself. So that's the question then. Okay, how can you deal with these unequal outcomes? And then this is really nice. This idea of procedural justice. This is a way to deal with unfair or unequal outcomes, and it's also called fair process. So this was actually I think this was in 2005, a nice article by Ludo van der Heijden. He really translated this idea of procedural justice to the family business side. And it means actually, if we look at it has a principle based on the legal procedures. And then in this first authors, Thibault and Walker, they viewed those procedures fair when they felt that people had process control. And if they had process control, then people became more satisfied with the outcome of this legal procedure. It leads to more intellectual and emotional recognition. It creates commitment and trust, and that also builds voluntary cooperation. So that could mean that procedural justice or fair process can be a way to mitigate unfair distributive outcomes. So if an actor feels that a procedure has been properly followed, he or she will be much more likely to accept the outcome. And fair procedures can mitigate the ill effects of unfavorable outcomes. This is something that has been described as the solution for unequal or unfair distributive outcomes. And we were very interested in this, and this is also like what our research is about. Should this be the only part? Or do we also have to consider the distributive outcome parts? So if we look at the successes and the non-successes, what parts do they consider more important? Is it this procedural justice or maybe the outcome, so the distributive justice? So looking more at this procedural justice, this is actually the basics, right? The 3 E's of what is called a fair process. What is very important is the engagement of all the parties that should be engaged, which also means in succession that you have to engage all the people that may find all kind of consequences of the decisions that are taken. So these are typical also the non-successors. They will feel a consequence if the business is being transferred to one of the brothers and sisters, because that means that they will have, for example, a lower inheritance. The second part, the third E, or the second E, that is the explanation. And that is very important, that you explain all the details of the process. So why, for example, it is being decided that the business will be gifted to one of the children. And that is often a financial reason, which is very hard to explain. We also find in the project that it's often that there's not much knowledge about all these financial consequences, and we have often an accountant that is going to explain parts of how the business will be transferred. But if this accountant is only there if there's a successor and an incumbent leader, that means that it's hard to explain exactly what the accountant has told. So one of the advice would be so involve this accountant also with all the other children and explain carefully what is going to be done. But not only about this financial part, of course, also about the entire process. So that means that, explaining how the succession process will look like, what is going to be done after the succession. And then third, the expectation clarity, which is much more about the expectations about the process. That should be clear, but also expectations about what's going to be done afterwards. So, for example, if we decide upon succession, and then one expectation can be that the farm will not be sold within 5 or 10 years after the succession. So these kind of rules can be part of this expectation clarity. So that means that you are having some kind of rules of engagement. So a little bit further, and this is how Veldhuizen transferred this to family businesses. I think this is a little bit more detailed than the 3 E's. So again, it's the engage, so everyone is heard, encouraged to present opposing viewpoints. You can use all kind of techniques like deep democracy to encourage everyone to present your viewpoints, and that there is sincere communication between all the people that are involved in the process. And then sincere exploration as well. So different options are explored. What we often see is that families only see the succession as just one option, that there's only one option, but there are often more options that have not been considered. For an example, we often see, of course, that succession is, so the farm is being transferred to one of the sons. It should be a male successor often. And then automatically the daughters will not be part of the succession process, because they think, well, it's going to be the son. But if you listen carefully to the daughters, there can also be options that they, for example, will marry with another farmer that may be a very suitable successor, because he might not take over the other farm. And another option would be, of course, and that's also with the changing of the agriculture industry. So farms are getting much bigger. So it becomes much more of a management task instead of just a heavy task. So all these old-fashioned ideas, I would say, of taking just the eldest son as a successor, that there might be other options as well. Then the third part is the explanation, so everyone is informed. There should be clear facts and logical reasoning. And that's often the case if we look afterwards and people are looking back at the succession process. They say, well, the decision, how decisions were made was really not clear. We really didn't understand why things happened. And so that is important. Then the expectation clarity I just explained. And then a fifth part that Ludo van der Heijden added is also that evaluation is very important. That you also look afterwards if the decisions are constantly being implemented. And then if the behavior is what was decided upon, that can also be rewarded. And then things may also change or adapted. So there should also be always be time to learn and to sit again together to discuss, like, okay, this is not how we made the plan at the moment that we decided upon the succession process. So we had the 5 E's, the 3 E's, the 5 E's, and now the 5 C's of procedural justice. Of course, in this entire process, communication is key. So this is really most important. That's also what most families say. Communication is not like their strongest thing. Sometimes it's even weak. and families really should learn how to communicate well, because this is so important for this succession process and also for implementing this fair process. To give everyone a voice and also to listen in a way that all kind of feelings are being heard during the process. So it's much more about empathic listening and so this is something that we feel that a lot of firms in the Netherlands, and not only farms, a lot of family firms, they really have struggles with how to communicate well. The second C is for the clarity of the process. I already explained. Consistency is also very important, of course, in time and between persons, because otherwise feelings of injustice will arise. On the other hand, it should also be changeable. So the succession process should be flexible when needed. You can determine all kind of rules, but if the situation changes because the market changes or the government comes up with some new rules or some new laws, then you have to be adaptable. And the final C, that stands for the culture, and it is really that the meaning that everyone is committed to fair process. So that it should not be some kind of trick. And that's what we find in the interviews, that successors or non-successors may be a bit skeptical. It's like, okay, we are sitting together on the table and we're talking about succession, but actually the only one who is deciding about succession is our father. So where is our voice? So then there's not really a commitment to fair process. Then a little bit more about the method. So what did we do? Now, our research project, it had a really nice name. So actually the working title was Family Farm Succession. It's called From Kitchen Table to Family Constitution. As we see that succession is often discussed on the kitchen table. And we have these family discussions, family meetings, but there's also a lot of issues about the business that are being discussed at the kitchen table. But we've seen, and that was the idea for this project, that a governance instrument like a family constitution that is not often being used in very small firms. It's an instrument that is more like for the larger, medium-sized enterprises, but not for the really small enterprises. So what we try to do in this project, that was the instrument, how can we adapt the family constitution to the situation of family farms? So that was the idea from the beginning. And for this reason, we found 14 family farms, which were in different stages of succession. And they were all in the northeast part of the Netherlands. And within this 1.5 years, we had 66 interviews. So we talked with all kind of successors and potential successors. We talked to the incumbent leaders. So actually these were the male and the female leaders, often working together as a couple and running the business. We also talked to the partners of potential successors. And we talked to all kind of siblings, which are the non-successors. And we talked during these interviews about their personal situation, the family context, the history of the farm, of course, the business situation. So how is the business going? How is the process of succession looking like? How do the family members communicate? And all different aspects of fairness. For example, with regard to the choice of the successor, if they regard this as fair, looking at the different needs in the family sphere, if people consider that the decisions about it as fair, but also the distribution of property, how they react to that. And then, we had altogether 8 cases, and mainly they were in the dairy farming. So, and they were all like second, third, and fourth generation family farms in different stages of succession. So that means some, had already gone through the succession process years ago, like the second dairy farm 7 years ago. But still, you can feel there that the succession is very present. So the succession process, of course, it's not a moment in time. It's really a long process. So on average, 10 years. But in these cases, it's really, I think, even longer than 10 years. So it really goes on and it goes on. And if you think it's over, then it starts over again, because then the new children are coming in. So this is something that we noticed here, and that so we tried to talk with all the people that were involved, also the non-successors, as I explained, some other type of farms that were not dairy farms. So this was a dairy and crop farm, a diversified farm, which is also like, more innovative way, I would say, to run the business. That is not very, that started only 10 years ago as a way to provide for some extra income. We see a lot of farms, they start, for example, a bed and breakfast, or they also had an art gallery. So it became a very diversified farm. This was farm 6, also a combination of dairy and pork. And then they, of course, they had all different situations and all different wishes and all different desires. So looking at all these different farms, we grouped the findings actually in, so what we started with a framework of what kind of principles of justice were being used, and what kind of, like, the principles of distributive justice and of procedural justice. And therefore we also asked, of course, the successors and the incumbent leaders, how they looked at these different types of justice. And this is actually the first 5 parts of the findings that are based on what they've been saying. And the first thing we found and we noticed there was that a lot how things are going in the present is based on their past experiences. So and that's also what we say. That was also a reason why they wanted to participate in a project, because they wanted to do things differently. But they're also looking back at the past, sometimes very negatively, but also positively, and that they are starting to realize, for example, in case 1, that they were automatically driven in a position, so that it wasn't even a choice, but they came in that position. And things like, it was out of the question that one of my sisters would become a farmer. It's really the strong focus that the next successor should be male successor. And that's something that we notice as well. So we have these 3 principles of distributive justice, which is equality, which is needs and merit. But there are also other principles that are being used, which is, for example, gender. And we also asked the non-successors how they looked at this, that only their brother could be the successor. And another principle that was also used was what is called primogeniture. So that it's only the eldest son that could be the successor. And that can be unfair in the eyes of other children, of course. And another example in this category, pushed by her husband, my sister fought for a share of the farm. Only after many painful negotiations, she finally agreed with a lower sum of money. And in this case, it also meant that the family relations were really harmed. And another case, we see that the parents-in-law and her husband went to the notary. But the other siblings were never informed, and nowadays they regretted this and they see that this as a learning moment, how to deal with our succession in the future. So that's really nice that they can reflect on this experience in the past, and also that it's being discussed with the children, that they want things differently. Second finding here, or second category, is what we called here the traditional views about farming. I discussed there. Some farmers really say it's not a business for women because it's just too heavy, so it should be a male successor. Although we have one daughter who was interested in farming, we asked our son to become the next farmer automatically again. So that's something that not only happened in the past, it still happened. So also in these cases that are in the present, these decisions are really made. And this one, for example, our daughters never worked full-time on the farm during summer holidays and never milked cows, or told me that they wanted to learn this. That's something that is taken for granted, so to say. And when we talk to these daughters, they were really a bit of angry. We see this later on with the non-successors, that they felt, okay, why was our little brother the only one who could go out with our father? Well, we also had interest to work on the farm. No, we were only allowed to work in the kitchen. So this is quite traditional. Another category here that was derived from the interviews with the successors and the incumbent leaders, that is really about the unequal division of family equity. So this is about the distributive justice. And these are things like my opinion toward my own children is that those who didn't work on the farm don't deserve a share in the farm transfer. So this is really about merit. If you don't work in the farm, you don't deserve a right to be the successor. But sometimes even the advisors that were involved also had special advice, I would say, that the accountant even advised to withhold financial information about the business value. We were scared that it would be a source of conflict between our children. With money from a subordinated loan, we try to help the other two children. So the parents, they feel a bit ashamed that they can't help the other children. And then even the accountant advises not to share the information, which is really not what you would like to have if we look at procedural justice. And things were said here like, I don't know if this is the right way of saying it in English, but we shouldn't wake the sleeping dogs. This is what was being said here. And then the final quote here in this category, my daughters would own a total of 33 or even 50% of the land and earn an income from renting it. So these kind of things were spinning through the head. So if we could share the possession equally, but this also would create the possibility they interfere with the business and harm the continuity of it. So that might be a reason not to share the possession. Another category we found here, and that's really depending on the situation, so really on the context. We call it, some farms, they have some room to maneuver. As for example, some families, and that's because they just had a good saving account, that they could help also the other children financially, for example, by buying a house or a piece of land. Depending on, there's also one of the categories that is a field farm, so they don't own a lot of land, and then it becomes much easier to share the farm between the children. So in this case, the two brothers, they could have their own branch at different locations, that we would still cooperate with each other in business structure. So these are other kinds of thinking, which is much more difficult if the farm is linked to the land. And that's also been seen as a possibility that the parents are still very young, so there's still 10 more years to work together and to partner, and that the children see this as a big opportunity because they also can have some work elsewhere and they can find other ways of earning money. And then there's this fifth category, which is derived from the successors. They have some mixed feelings about communication. It's being said, for keeping the peace, it would be nice that we have a family plan. It shouldn't be a discussion about money. Knowing each other's wishes and values is important. For instance, I want to know if there's still a place for me on the farm after my retirement. This is being said by one of the incumbent leader. And I think also these issues about talking about values, family values, that's also part of this family constitution. So these families started to realize that this is important also for them, and also to keep the family harmony. If they know from each other what their most important values are and also what their connecting and binding values are, that makes it much easier to have these discussions together. And then this quote, I just referred to it, my opinion is that basically all decisions are made only by me and my parents without any involvement of my sisters. They should accept the outcomes, and therefore a written business plan is needed. So there's only a few people that decide on this process. This doesn't look really like that it fits the rules of procedural justice. Then looking at the findings that we derived from the non-successors that we heard here, one is that merit is a basis for the choice of successors. And then, for example, this non-successor, which is also a male non-successor, he says, my two older brothers who will take over the farm work harder than me and are more motivated to become farmers. So that's something based on merit. He says they work much harder in the farm, so they also deserve to take over the farm. And from another non-succeeding daughter, she said, I never worked on the farm and I do not know what is going on. Therefore, I have to ask myself whether I have a right to get involved. So this is also really based on merit. And this is something related. If something important had to be done, our father always asked our younger brother. We were never asked to drive the tractor or milk the cows. Our place was in the kitchen. I just referred to this situation. We were needed only for harvest activities during the summer. And in this case, the daughters, they grant the farm to their youngest brother, but they also have some condition on that. They say he really has to be motivated for 100%, not for 80% or 95%, but he should be motivated for 100%. Otherwise, there may be other options. For example, me and my husband could also take over the farm. Then when we asked during the interview, did you also discuss this with your parents? The answer was no. This is really interesting, of course, because this is very important information during the succession process, that there may be other options and how they feel about the succession with regard to the brother. And then, the question why they didn't tell this to their parents and why they didn't discuss this yet was for me very surprising. And that was namely that they didn't want conflict. So they didn't discuss these hot issues, so to say, or the elephants in the room, just to prevent conflict in the family. And that is, actually, this is one of the triggers of the current project I'm working on. This project is called Without Friction, No Shine, and it's really about conflict management in family businesses. Because we also found that many families are very hesitant about conflict avoidant, so to say. Because they've never learned how to deal with a conflict. So this is also one of the triggers here, and we really want to give families the tools to become more experienced in how to deal with some kind of tensions or how to have these difficult conversations. Then this is actually the second part. It's called finding 7. This is the second category derived from the non-successors, and it's based on the needs, used as a basis for decisions. And one really nice quote here is from two daughters. And they call their farm, where they were raised, this is really the most beautiful place on earth, a place where they could spend time with their parents and siblings. And they realized that their need for such a place could only be fulfilled if the farm was transferred to the brother. So based on this need, that this is the most beautiful place, and they really wanted to return, they also granted to their brother. So these kind of ways, that it doesn't mean that the process should be very fair, just based on this idea, and also that the farm will stay in the family is for them a good reason to grant the farm to their youngest brother. But also other ways that are interesting here. It feels arrogant to ask our parents for a share because they never kept anything for themselves and preserved everything for the business. So because the parents don't take a large share in the selling of the farm, the other children also feel that they shouldn't ask for their part, so to say. And then the final one here, I gave them my share of the farm. Why didn't they help my husband's business by letting him rebuild the farmhouse? This is really a sense of injustice based on merit. So the non-succeeding daughter in this case, she really feels like she gave her share. She got rid of her inheritance. But then the situation happened that her husband, who had a construction firm, wanted the assignment to build the farm. The farmhouse should be rebuilt. And then the brother who succeeded, he gave this contract to another constructor. So that's really felt unequal. And then you can see that maybe it felt fair at the moment of the transfer, then even 5 to 10 years later, something can become unfair because these kind of issues can happen. Then looking at equality in relation to the distribution of property, some findings here is that it really depends on the amount of children that we see that if there are many children, then it becomes much easier to say, okay, we see that there can only be one successor. But if there are only 2 or 3 children, then we see that it becomes more difficult. And then another interesting finding here is that the non-succeeding siblings can grant their brother the farm, but they have more difficulties with the sister-in-law. So that's if there's a sister-in-law and she sees that she's spending money, that they feel that is part of the farm that their parents have grown up. Yeah, and that feels a bit hard. So that also have something to do with the relationship. That is, yeah, things are changing. And looking at the position of the brother who's taking over the farm, they also feel that they grant the transfer easily because they see, well, they don't earn a lot of money and working as a farmer is hard. It's poor, it doesn't earn a very high income, and it's also risky. So yeah, actually, yeah, I'm glad that he is taking over the farm and I can have a normal job, so to say. Mm, yeah, and then this final quote here is about a sister who is working in the healthcare sector. And then she's looking at this opportunity because the parents created a bed and breakfast in their farm. So she's looking at the opportunity that maybe in the future, if she doesn't want to work, maybe there's this opportunity to work together with a brother. So this is, yeah, also thinking about the distribution here, that there's not like a fixed outcome yet. Then, of course, we also asked about how they experienced procedural justice. And this is really, yeah, we found this is very interesting. That looking back at the succession process, that people, the non-successors say, we felt more comfortable if all relevant information had been more openly discussed and explained with professional guidance. So that's really what they miss. The information is often hard to get, hard to understand, and you need really good experts to explain all the details. Second one here, we were still very young when my brothers took over the business. We agreed on matters I did not fully understand. The same thing. It's really about the knowledge that is important to get also to educate the non-successors about all the details, the financial and the legal and the fiscal details about the succession process. And then this final one, and then it's really, they become a bit skeptical about this procedural justice. That mom and dad, they want to involve me, but dad makes the ultimate decision. So does it have some meaning or is it just symbolic? I don't see the need for all these talks about succession. So they feel, that why should they talk about it if everything is already decided? So that's really about this, what we call the commitment part of procedural justice. Then looking at the acceptance, and it really depends on actually all the previous categories. So that's what we find here. It's not just procedural justice and it's not just distributive justice. It's just a combination that makes the non-succeeding siblings accept the outcome. And we've seen in all these cases, actually all 14 cases except one, that there were no strong feelings of injustice about the succession process or its outcome or anticipated outcomes. So this is actually in one of the 14 cases that they really had this strong feeling, and that also had to do with their brother who didn't want to hire her own husband, who was this constructor. So then it feels really unfair. Yeah, this is also important, that the non-succeeding siblings, they never spoke explicitly about their right to an equal share in the property. So this is not something that was raised during the interviews. So that's, and they really realized that they would jeopardize the brother's occupation if they would demand a share. So that's really something, they felt this, yeah, they were convinced, and that's, I think, the main finding, that if we asked what they really want, they all want that the family of that the farm should be in the family. So that becomes the overarching goal actually of the entire succession. And if that becomes clear from the beginning, then you're looking to all kind of things to manage it and also to compensate, for example, the non-successors in some kind of ways. And there were also families, or there was one family, and they didn't have the monetary resources to compensate the non-successors, but they did it in a much more symbolic way. And what they did was they had this very nice old tree near the farmhouse, and what they did to as a symbolic way for the succession is that this tree had to be how do you call it? What do we do with a tree? You if you saw a tree, right? Then you get all the nice wood from it. And what they did with this wood, they made all kind of garden furniture. And that's what they did. They gave all the non-successors really nice garden furniture made from the old family tree. And that's as a way of saying like, okay, the family farm is also part of the new area where you're going to live. So all these kind of more symbolic ways also helped to get the outcome more accepted. So then, yeah, actually to round up, so what we did in this project, we actually looked first on the left side of the model. This model is what we built based on the different elements I just discussed. So what kind of justice principles were applied by the successors and the incumbent leaders, looking at merit, needs, and equality, but also primogeniture and gender, which really appeared as important principles. But also looking at what procedural justice principles they also used, whether they had these family meetings and yeah, the way how they proceed with that, whether they were more symbolic or whether it was really something that they felt was important and that all the children had something to say. And then what we also looked at, of course, was whether how the non-successors looked at this fair process, how they evaluated it, how they evaluated also the outcomes, and how that together led to the acceptance of the outcomes. So to conclude with, looking at the time, it's almost time, Joy. I think it's 6 already.
Yes, it is. It
So
is.
I have to round up 1 minute.
Yeah, you can have probably a couple more minutes. I think what it would be lovely is if you could focus on some of like the practical pieces that
Yeah,
you kind of came
yeah,
to bring to this. Yeah.
yeah. Quickly, we see the decisions are based on various principles of justice. We see the combination of merit, gender, needs, and equality. And what I think is very practical is that we see that in many cases these families are not explicit about how they do this and which criteria they give priority. And I would say as a practical advice that as a family people should realize what kind of principles are important, and then that's food for thought and also food for discussion. And we see that mostly the non-successors were not directly involved in the decision-making process, but of course they are affected by the consequences. So that's yeah, also a learning point. I would say that this procedural justice is something really that can be really helpful. It's really part of the process. Yeah, the non-successors, they have some distance and they evaluate the outcome and always try to find a way to deal with it. They weigh the various perspectives of distributive justice and they evaluate the outcomes. Yeah, and they also when they have the same justice perspective as the incumbents and the successor, it helps because the justice perspective of the incumbents and the successor, that they invent the process, so to say. And as the non-successors, they feel that they can live with these rules, then that helps the acceptance of the outcomes. But as a learning point for the successors and the incumbent leaders, I would say that it's really good to check these justice perspective with the non-successors first before you apply them. Yeah, and we find that the continuity of the family farm can be a overarching guiding principle. And that's also important to discuss during this process. How strong is the wish to hold the farm in the family? Yeah, and there are some boundaries, of course, that the non-successors have, but they're often not very clear about those boundaries, and they often become aware of it long after the process. Sometimes they even expect some things in return for their willingness, for their granting factor, but they're not even explicit about what they really want. So this is something that should be part of these family meetings. And that the decision-making process is often not very transparent. We see that yeah, the expectations and claims by the non-succeeding siblings are not explicit either. So this is something I would say that families should work on. Make things more explicit and discuss these things in a good way together. So the final practical implications. So first of all, I think the study shows that the non-succeeding siblings have a very important role in the succession process. It is a complex process how non-succeeding siblings evaluate the succession process. It can be influenced by many different events. And communication should be aimed at making the principles of justice being applied by successors, parents, and non-successors more explicit. Some final remarks of our participants. These are some of the families that cooperated. This is really nice, of course, that the project is so practical that it sparks many conversations. This is another family. They say, I have learned to put myself in someone else's shoes during the project. And at home, neither my husband nor I were ever told anything about the business. We want to do it differently. Openness is very important. So this is very nice that families are looking to succession in this new, more modern way. I would finalize with this one. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope everything is clear. And if not, I'm open to all of your questions.
Thank you, Erik, for presenting today. If anybody has any questions or comments that they'd like to share, please unmute and do that. I'm going to take Erik off of Spotlight so that we can see everybody. And before everybody jumps off, I do want to remind people our next education hour is going to be September 30th, and that's a Tuesday at 10 o'clock Central Time. And the registration link will come out next week on that because we just finalized that information. So that'll be coming out. That's going to be called Understanding Farm Succession Planning Through a Readiness Lens. And that's from some research in Canada. But I will move this back to what we talked about today. I think that's interesting. I feel like at least in a lot of pockets of the United States, we are maybe moving away from that gender bias of the daughters not being able to take over. I think that's still there in some places, but I think we are maybe moving from that. I find that in some of the families that I've worked with, what I've heard from the non-succeeding siblings is they really want to know because it is very much a fine balance of what the owner generation needs for retirement and what the successor generation can afford to pay a lot of times for the purchase of those assets. The non-succeeding siblings feel more comfortable if they understand that their parents are going to be cared for in an appropriate way. I think that some of that conversation is what comes up when I work with those. I don't know if you have any thoughts. I mean, our systems are different, but knowing that they're going to need income as they age and making sure that that income is in place somehow coming from the business, most likely. Other
There was,
thoughts? Yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
Erik.
yeah, there was a question, Joy. Also, if that's also in the Netherlands.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you see any of that in your country, yeah, in your
Mhm.
research.
Yeah, I see. We also see this movement that also daughters are being more considered as potential successors.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, we starting a new research project about women leadership in family businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Also the struggle that some women experience with this in all kind of industries. So that is not just farming; it's in other industries as well. And then indeed the income of the parents. I think that's the final part that you raised.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that also the non-succeeding siblings they worry about, whether the parents they have a good income that is appropriate for all the work that they've put in the business. And
Yeah,
they've worked so hard for all those years, and then it's so important that they will have a decent pension. Yeah,
yeah. I think that's the struggle because I think a lot of times the parents are way more focused on that legacy of making sure
Mhm.
that the farm continues in the family and maybe um, not thinking about what they need for
Yeah,
their own. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's also important to raise that. Yeah, yeah.
Um, One thing I'm curious about, because I feel like I often have a junior generation that comes up to me and says, I'd really like to engage my parents on the topic of succession, and they're just not ready to do that, and are even resistant to the idea of involving a third party. And I don't know how to phrase this. I don't know if you have like an elevator pitch or just an approach that you take to plant seeds.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
really-
Good, nice question. It's similar in the Netherlands. Similar that it's really hard to talk about succession by the parents, often because it's also realizing that you're getting older. So that's one part. And what helps, and maybe that's the elevator pitch, is to explain that a typical succession process in farming takes 7 to 10 years. And that we see that a lot of farmers are 55 years or older. That's more than half of the population. So that means if you want to retire at the age of 65, 67, you better start at the age of 55. So I would say the pitch is to explain that the succession process takes very long. And that's not an easy process. It's not like a step that you do in 1 month, that it's really a process that you should work on for many years.
Thank you. I enjoyed your talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
If you
I'm
have time
wondering,
for,
yeah,
Well,
I think my
Liza,
question's quick.
okay,
oh,
Leah.
go ahead, go ahead.
Just wondering if there's a resource to find out more about family constitution.
Ah, yes. Yes, there is. We have some books in Dutch, but that's not what you're looking for, I guess. No, there's quite some material, and let's see. Yeah, we have some, and it's easy to translate some. We have some, especially for this project, what we use in farming, and what kind of categories in a family constitution may be more interesting for a farm. So I could try to share that, maybe do some Google Translate and share that document with you. And I'm not sure. Yeah, there are definitely articles on the family constitution, even some books on what topics should be part of a family constitution with all kind of examples. But I can't give you the title now, but maybe something that we can send later.
Wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Nice. Okay. I will send it to Joy then.
Yep, and then we'll get it out
Okay.
to the group. Yep.
Nice.
Liza, do you have a question?
Sure, thanks for asking that question about constitution. I wanted to ask that too. My other question was if you'd seen any families implement any tools for the situation in which a successor generation, like the non-succeeding siblings kind of give up their claims to help the farm continue, but then for some reason the farm doesn't continue and that successor may choose to stop farming and then they suddenly own the asset. And, I've just kind of wondered if there's ever been any tools by which the non-succeeding siblings kind of regain some, inheritance or some access. Because I can see that's where the real resentment would be in that next generation. The farm folds and suddenly, one sibling is sitting on that golden egg and everybody else kind of lost out.
Yes, that's a very interesting question as well. I'm looking for the English word. What we have in the Netherlands is this arrangement. They call it, in Dutch it's meerwaardeclausule. I'm looking for the English word. So this is something that it's added value clause. It's a clause in the succession. And then you can arrange that, for example, if the farm is being sold in the next 10, 15, 20 years, that all the extra money that is being raised or being earned is going to be divided between all the siblings. So this is something that they put in a contract, and each family decides on its own. Some say it's lifelong. It's a lifelong clause. Anything that happens to the farm and it's being sold, it's not the idea that the successor should buy a nice house somewhere in a Mediterranean area or so. But then this is a way to guarantee that the extra value that is being earned is going to be divided by all the siblings and also even the parents. So they have this clause. I'm not sure if that's also in the US the case.
We've seen something. I've seen some things like that. It gets hard. That lifelong one is a hard one because the concern would be if that successor put significant improvements onto the property? How do you separate out the value of what they inherited versus what they built themselves would be the conversation to figure out. So, but I have
Yeah.
seen I've seen the ones where it's maybe like 5 or 10 years seems a little bit more able to do that. And your land values probably are like ours, like they jump, they increase so quickly. That's
Yeah.
also another concern.
Yeah.
Looks like Sarah has her hand up as well.
Hey, thanks. Having some webcam trouble. I'm seeing an increase where the farm transition is actually skipping the child generation and jumping to the grandchildren. I wondered if you
Yeah.
came across that in any of your studies, on what your thoughts are on that sort of dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, good question. We see it, but it was not part of the 14 cases that we studied, but we see it in other farms as well, that they skip one generation. And that's because of the young age that people get children, and then at the time that they want to go with pension, then yeah, they already have grandchildren that are at the age of 25 or 28 that yeah, become the new. We call it the Prince Andrew or the Prince Charles effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know Prince Charles of the Royal Kingdom of the UK.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was like what, in his 70s before he
Yeah,
became
but
king?
yeah, exactly. So he's still king, but
Mhm.
we often thought that he wouldn't ever be king, that it
Yeah.
would be transferred to the next. Yeah. Yeah, but these cases are quite unique. So I would say, yeah, not in the 14 cases we studied, maybe a few in 100.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Sarah, what state are you from? I'm sorry, I don't remember
Uh,
what's
I'm in Pennsylvania.
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Right. Are there any other questions? This has been really great. I'm really happy that there have been lots of questions for you, Erik, and and from the chat, it looks like everybody's really been very engaged and interested in your information. So I appreciate you taking the time today. And if you can send me the pieces that Leah asked about, I will make sure and get that out to everybody.